Robert, for joining us. I'm Paul Siegel. This is Robert McMillen. We will jump into it at another Meet the Gurus. I appreciate everyone arriving and Robert's time, particularly as we all know, I'm not the guru. I'm the talking head that engages in conversation and hopefully takes your questions as well. Today's topic is really Windows Server 2019, but mostly it's about servers and servers on-prem, servers in the cloud, and obviously a whole myriad of top topics that Robert has for many years, I'll say decades, been immersed in. So with that, I want to just really introduce Robert McMillen. Robert, tell us a little about yourself, kind of how you got into the whole world. Take us back of not that into the world way back then, but how did you get into the world of technology? What was the passion that drove you? What kind of led you into one direction versus another? That would be really helpful for the viewers.
My first career was in photography, and I had started taking pictures for the local newspaper, and eventually getting into weddings and things like that. And I opened my first store, which was like a combination film developing and photography studio, when I had just turned 19. Right. And it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. Eventually built it up to 3 stores and studios. But then all of a sudden, around the mid-90s, things started to change. Things started to go digital, and all the things that I had built up suddenly became like the guy who was building wagon wheels in the era of cars. Right. And I realized I got to get out of this business while it's still worth something, and get into technology, because obviously that's the way things are going. And so I ended up selling everything I had and went back to college to learn technology. And so it was fascinating. Of course, at that time in the mid-90s, Novell was king as far as having a client-server type of setup. And so I learned Novell, and then eventually Microsoft started taking over the market. I learned Microsoft, and then I started working for other people just to see what it was kind of like. And then finally, 9/11 happened, and in 2001, and then after working for a few years for other people, I decided, it's time that I start my own consulting company. I actually believed it would be, more stable, because you wouldn't have to worry about the whims of the market. I could move back and forth depending on what vertical market might be hot. And so at that point, I'd been heavily involved in Microsoft. I earned my first MCSE, an NT4, and then Windows 2000. And as time went on, I realized that this is as a long-term business, this is really a great place to be. And I enjoyed the work. I started hiring people, eventually building up into a multi-million-dollar company in the Portland, Oregon area. And it was something that I really liked. But one thing that I felt was missing was my mom had told me a long time ago, you're going to be a teacher. And I said, I'm not going to be a teacher, because when you be a teacher, then you're going to be poor. They don't pay teachers. But, if you're a teacher in technology, it's a completely different. They actually do value you, and they do pay you for it. Right. So as time went on, I started thinking about my exit plan from technology and becoming a teacher. And so I earned my bachelor's and master's degree, and moved to started teaching at the local community college. And I really enjoyed it. And eventually I sold my consulting practice so I could help teach people how to get into technology. And that's really what we're here today to talk about, right? There's a lot of people out there who are either just thinking about getting into an IT career, or they're already in it and they want to know how to make more money, how to get them the maximum amount out of their careers. And that's really what I do almost all the time now, making courses, making videos individually, and then of course teaching.
It's actually fascinating. You mentioned Novell, and years ago I was in the banking business and then tech banking. But at that time I was in the East Coast. I worked heavily with some of the venture capital firms. One was called Safeguard Scientific, and Safeguard Scientific was founded by a guy named Pete Musser. And Pete Musser's license plate in his very old car, much like a kind of a Warren Buffett situation, where he had made so much money, it was unbelievable, but he still had his car from 30 years before was Novell, because he was the guy.
Oh, really?
Pete Muster was the guy who backed Novell. So in the parking lot was that was his one I guess his one splurge. But people, you mentioned kind of some interesting things. Not the least of which was film, not the least of which was Novell. Now these are things that have not really been cutting edge and current. I guess film might be these days. Had a comeback. But networking is really where you began, right? Your fundamental roots were in, putting together computers and putting together servers and putting together communication systems. So, and that all rests on the concept of, there are servers behind that serve up this information. So the world has changed radically from the on-prem to the cloud. Where does Windows and Microsoft sit in that universe? I mean, it's kind of a big question. But, there's all sorts of products, and we talked about this for Windows, Server 2019 versus Azure versus the cloud. So where do all these, if you can in some way distill the way to think about it for someone who's relatively new to that arena?
Yeah, if you're new to this entire type of business, you definitely want to learn two operating systems. One, of course, would be Microsoft Windows Server and Client, Windows 10. But also, you'd want to learn Linux, and in some cases, Unix. Unix is similar to Linux. Obviously, Linux was based on Unix a long time ago. There are a lot of different flavors of Linux, but if you pull up a command prompt or a shell, they pretty much all use the same commands at that point. Mm-hmm. But what I found is that, to this day, that Windows drives the connectivity between the client and the server. Whereas Linux is more of an application type of a server. So in other words, Active Directory is still going to be the king on premises for now, and eventually in the cloud over the next 10, 15 years, where you would authenticate to an Active Directory server at Azure or at AWS, Amazon Web Services, either one. So if you're breaking into this entire thing, Microsoft would like you to believe that everything is going to be in the cloud. Microsoft even killed off their MCSE program, Certified System Expert program, as of January 31st, and they're just going now with badges and things like that. It's all based on Azure for the most part. Mm-hmm. So they would have you believe that this is the way things are, but they're not. Things are headed that direction, right. But they are not anywhere near there. I think that Microsoft was premature in cutting that off. So the thing you want to learn is a combination of on-premises and cloud technology. For the very first cloud type of certification, the AZ900 from Microsoft is a really good one. It gets your feet wet into Azure. Yep. As far as Azure versus AWS, for a long time AWS was king. Microsoft has cut into that lead. It's getting close to being even at this point. Mm-hmm. You can do everything at Amazon as far as Microsoft servers goes and things like that you can do basically in Azure for basic client server type management. But Azure has added a lot of new pieces to that as well. Mm-hmm. That for me makes that more attractive. So if I were to teach cloud computing, which platform would I use? I would go with the Azure platform. We see people moving more from AWS to Azure than the other way around, for the most part. But for a long time, Active Directory on premises is going to be here, and you're going to want to learn, client server, and we've got a lot of great videos and courses to help you learn that.
Yeah. So one of the things you mentioned, we were talking with Tiago Costa the other day, who does a lot of Azure work, and particularly also AZ900, was the comment that, if you compare the two, forget the technology for a moment, but if you look at it from a purely business point of view, think about how long Microsoft's been around, think about how many business clients Microsoft has, which is in the millions, the many millions, and then think about if you're a consultant or looking for a job, you choose, how many more opportunities you have to work with a client that probably is using Microsoft products in one form or another. And as I like to joke, why did it take God 6 days to create the heavens and earth? Well, he didn't have an installed base of users.
Yeah, that's right.
So Microsoft has a quite enormous installed base of users. So if you're trying to jump on that wagon, there's not a small amount to be said for the value of that wagon. So it's quite interesting. So you talk about Active Directory and obviously the fundamentals of that. Talk about it literally from a neophyte's point of view. What is it? Why is it important? And how do you begin to learn about it as a young practitioner?
Sure. Well, it's very important because 95% of all Fortune 500 companies are using it, and that's not going to change anytime soon. What it is it's an extensible database. So what is extensible? Well, if you think of it as like a rubber band, you can make it bigger, you can make it smaller. It's all based on the objects that you put into it. An object can be a username. An object can be a computer. It can be a printer. There's a lot of other, it could be a group. A lot of things, can be objects inside Active Directory. And what Active Directory does is it securely manages that information so users can authenticate into the database. So what does authenticate mean? Well, when you authenticate, it means you're going to put in, say, a username, a password, a fingerprint. You may do a bone scan. I went to one data center that used a bone scan to authenticate people to be able to get into the data center. So there's lots of different things that you can do to authenticate. Once you're authenticated into Active Directory, then you need to be authorized. And authorization means that you're able to use specific resources. You're able to print to that printer. You're able to open up that share. You're able to use that application. All those things are done by Active Directory, and they're done in a way that's secure. So if you need, technology insurance against any type of fraud or theft or anything like that, you've got to know Active Directory. If you are going to be setting up a new dental office or any kind of practice, you've got to know Active Directory. And even if you decide to use Active Directory in the cloud, it works pretty much the same way. They have made a few changes to the cloud version, but for the most part, it works, pretty much the same way. So that is Active Directory in a nutshell, and that's pretty much why you need to know it.
Well, it's kind of interesting. I don't think users can quite see your background, but in your background there is a fire extinguisher, probably the only thing that's not digital, and maybe a small refrigerator. Pretty much everything is an object these days on the cloud or on a network, right? Our phones are obviously our watches, very often. And so you're talking about the universe essentially, right? Well, maybe it's not today a pencil sharpener, but it's getting down to a level of granularity in terms of obviously healthcare. You pointed that out in terms of authentication, but clearly diabetes oriented measuring devices, heart monitors. There's obviously a lot of products out there, and there's a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs. So let's talk about how does one learn? What are the courses that take you through the steps of, I'm going to really understand Active Directory as a foundational element of my awareness of networks, servers, etc. So where am I going and things that hang on those?
Yeah, so if you're going to learn, the times are changing as far as where and how we learn things. There was a time where you would go to a very expensive boot camp that would cost, $3,000 to $8,000 for a week. I remember somebody trying to sell me on that, long time ago. Right. And they'll either prepare you for a certification or they'll prepare you to learn, a specific technology. But that's pretty much in the past. Right. Nowadays, you're either going to be purchasing a course or you're going to be subscribing to a company, and you're going to be seeing technology from people like myself and other gurus out there that have been in this business for a long time. And you can take these videos and you can watch these videos in bite-sized increments, because who has an entire week or entire month to just take off of work and unless of course you're unemployed right now and watch and learn all these different things and then go take a certification test. Those days are kind of difficult to come by. So You want to be able to learn when you can, learn on your phone, learn on your computer, that kind of thing. Community colleges and universities, they're also great places to learn these kind of things. But what they're doing is they're taking the courses, from places, such as Starweaver, and they're, using them, and then they're teaching them in the classroom. Right. So the advantage to that is that you get somebody you can actually ask questions, live to, which is awesome. Mm-hmm. But you can still, of course, ask questions, through online videos as well. It may not be an immediate feedback, but there are ways to do that. And so labs are another great thing. So you want to make sure that you have either a really good desktop or a beefed up laptop running, Windows 10, and then you could use Hyper-V, you could use VirtualBox, you could use VMware Workstation or Player, and then put virtual machines onto your computers. And then when you do that, you can practice creating a lab. Create that lab that you can, then, create an Active Directory server and then create a client to join that, that server and see how things interact. I remember the first time I set up a DHCP server in my house. I did, this is before virtual machines. And I was fascinated to see how a server could hand an IP address to a client, and then that client could then go out and use the internet. And I learned that all, at home, on my own. That's the kind of thing you need to do. But now you've got help. You've got videos that walk you through it. You've got people that you can reach out to while you're at home. So things are so much better than they were 20 years ago for people who are just breaking into the industry.
Yeah, one of the things we've added, obviously, your live labs and challenges, which is just what you're talking about, is learning by doing, and interaction with real live instructors is obviously what we're all about. But also sandboxes, spinning up servers, spinning up tools on the cloud that allow you to kind of mimic what you would be doing in a real job or a real function or building something. It's always the learning by doing. It's kind of interesting when you talk to people. There is the convenience of asynchronous learning, and but we all probably have lived through the world. If you ever look at any of your online courses, if one looks at any one of their courses they paid for, which I have paid for, even though we have about 20 courses on Udemy, for example, I've paid for a few courses, and I can look at them. Even the courses that I really wanted, I've gotten 5 to 10% of the way through. However, if I'm sitting with you in an online session, or you assign me something, and on Thursday or next Thursday it's due, it presents a quite different proposition. So I did a little video recently about how one of the problems of online education is sometimes it's purely altruistic. And while we all love to feel that we're altruistic, and in fact we all need the little cookie or carrot or whatever you want to analogize it to keep us moving. So and building is always a great way of doing that. Building one thing and then building another block on top of that, another top on that. So I know you've got a whole bunch of courses on our platform, and we're doing more of those live labs soon with you on those. I think so now someone has the fundamentals of the Active Directory under their belt, if you will. Now they're thinking about, okay, now I'm going into the server world. Where do I put my toe? You've talked about prem and on-prem and off-prem in the cloud. Where do you go next in terms of learning?
Yeah, so obviously the live labs, the videos, they're all great. You definitely want to take advantage of that, and you then want to create an account at Azure or at AWS, right. And you want to start doing. So if you've already got your own laptop or desktop, and you've done the labs and you've done your homework, and you've got that kind of hands-on experience, sign up at Azure. It's free. You can sign up with Azure. Azure will even Microsoft will give you a free $100 a month coupon to create a virtual machine, add storage. There's all different kinds of things that you can do that with the information that you've learned from your labs and your videos that you've already done. And now be careful with the price, though. I'll just give you an idea. When we did our very first virtual server on Microsoft Azure years ago when things were new. It was really expensive. The price has come down actually over the years. But we started up a virtual machine and we just let it sit there. And every once in a while we'd log into it and look at it and maybe, throw some data on there. But we didn't really do that much with it. At the end of the month, we got a bill for $500 from Microsoft.
Right. So,
now it's more like about, if you leave it on 100% of the time, it's more like about $175 for like a server.
right.
A Windows 10 client, it's going to be, maybe around $100, somewhere in that neighborhood. So that $100 credit, that comes from Microsoft, could help you, definitely, get your feet wet. But when you're not using the server, shut it down because they don't charge you when it's.
I know, it's funny you say that. We just did a course on Snowflake, and one of the instructors pointed out, if you really, and this is to a client that's a massive institution, said if you want to become poor quickly, keep Snowflake running. Because they had the experience in another engagement where for another massive company, by accident was left running, and they had a $120,000 bill at the end of the month. And I don't know if they negotiated that downward, but the reality is cost management obviously is an important thing. So we always talk about this in the way we teach courses. Obviously, is the idea of, yes, you need to know the technology, but you need to understand the business issues. Because you may be the great technologist, and then you walk away, as you just described, end up with a big bill, and you don't have a job, or you don't have a consulting client anymore because you didn't realize that. So always be mindful. I mean, that's one of the messages I think I'm taking away as well from you, is always be mindful of the fact that you may understand the technology, but don't shy away from that billing tab where it says accounts and billing. Watch that, because that's one of your metrics that you need to be aware of. So in terms of where do you see, obviously, as you did point out, I mean, we're all pushing to the future. Everyone wants to believe it's going to be cloud and all this kind of stuff. But you have lots of clients that are on-prem, that are still managing these things locally. How does, let's use an analogy of, 1 foot on the dock, 1 foot on the boat, right? They're veering, they're coming back and forth.
Right.
Where are you the network engineer or the server engineer when you, I say you meaning the student, the person learning, where do you need to be? I mean, where do you keep balancing your weight between the boat and the boat and the dock, meaning the on-prem versus the cloud?
Well, it depends on which technology you're talking about. For instance, email, there was a time not too long ago, let's just say up to about 10 years ago, where every office from large to small had an Exchange server on premises.
Right.
And that was a nightmare because it was, older versions of Exchange were very buggy and, had all kinds of problems. So as soon as Office 365 came around, these smaller companies started by, migrating there. So I would say 100% of anybody under 200 employees needs to be, on an online version of email. Don't have an email server, in your coat closet anymore. If you're talking about Active Directory, in a larger office, I would say you're better off on premises. So let me give you a little bit of history. So I remember back in the early 2000s, back then, even before there was an Azure and AWS was just getting started. Mostly it was for corporations. A regular person couldn't just sign up, at AWS in the early days. And so I could see that this was the way things were going. People no longer wanted to have servers in their closets anymore, where someone would bring in a winter coat and then they would cover up the fan and it would overheat and then it would shut down. Right. So they just didn't want that anymore. And so I thought to myself, this is a really good time to get into offering services, which is exactly what I did. So I rented a cage at a data center, and it's $500-$600 a month, and I put servers in there, and then I started offering email services, and I started offering website hosting, and remote desktop. You could use have your server hosted by my company, and then you could remote into it, and then store all your data there, and all your users could remote into it, or VPN into it. And it really took off. I mean, it was making, tens of thousands of dollars a month in a fairly short amount of time. But then Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure came along, and they just killed it. I mean, they killed that business, and I ended up moving all of my clients off to either Azure or AWS, depending on what they wanted, to do. So there are those things like websites and things like that. Those are all things you don't want to do that in-house. However, the things that you do want to do in-house is you do want to have your Active Directory server in-house, your clients connecting to that Active Directory server, and controlling things using group policy. And we haven't even really talked about group policy, but group policy basically allows you to take those objects and treat them all differently. You can say, hey, if you are an intern, you don't have the ability to shut down the server, for instance. If you are an executive, you're going to have priority, to maybe print over, people who are not executives. So group policy is a great thing to learn. Internal Active Directory DNS will make you highly employable. If you understand domain name services with Active Directory, you will be highly employable because 95% of any type of connectivity issues are DNS related, and that will also translate you into the cloud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, it's like these are building blocks, one after another. We call them journeys also, where you begin to build from foundational knowledge. So people often jump in and they think, that's someone else's job. But often, you find out it becomes your job because that person's out, number one, or number two, you're suddenly, working on something that requires much more knowledge. So never, I think one of the messages also you made clear is, don't skip ahead to version 5.0 or, the 5.0 level course when you need to get the 1.0 level course, the 1.0 level program. And it's often a challenge. Where do you, in terms of, I think you've made it pretty clear in terms of, there's all sorts of technologies. Obviously, you're a Microsoft guy because you've been in that universe for quite a while. Where do you see, as you get into the knowledge, where do you to the more advanced areas? Where do you think the specialties for someone who's involved in networking and servers should be? Where should they be focused in terms of where are the tools that are either on Azure or on prem? Where do you think the tools are that they should be really most knowledgeable about?
I think they should be knowledgeable a lot when it comes to networking and security. Active Directory, it's there's a finite amount to learn there. But with networking, you've got to understand how the computers can connect to each other, and you can connect to remote offices. You can connect to, maybe you have a private cloud at a data center like I was explaining earlier, or maybe you have a public cloud and a combination of those types of things. That is really, networking is really a difficult thing. For instance, not too long in the past, I had a TV station said, you know what, we've got a satellite at every one of our TV stations. Most TV stations don't just own one. Some parent company owns 6 or 7. And they say, you know what, it's killing me. I've got a satellite at every place, and they cost hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to manage. And so I said, why don't you do this? Let's just have one satellite where you pull in your TV shows from from CBS or whatever it is, and I will network it. So you pull down the shows, and I'll push all the TV shows out to all the other stations. And you'll no longer need all those satellites. And that's exactly what I did. And it was because of my knowledge of networking, I was able to network all those TV stations, together. And it saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And it made me, of course, a pretty good amount of money too. The other thing besides networking I would definitely get involved in is security. Microsoft has come up with a tremendous amount of new security tools. Just-in-time administration, just enough administration are just a couple of the technologies that are out there. They've also come up with an anti-crypto button. A lot of people don't even realize it's there. Windows 10 and Windows Server 2019 have a new feature now that can keep your files from being encrypted for ransomware. Many people don't even know that. So I would learn the security tools that Microsoft has come up with and utilize those tools. Security in itself, of course, is something you could focus on, and you could make your career totally in security. You have to also learn, Linux security, network security, things like that. Or you could just use that as part of the tools that you use as an IT administrator in a Windows network on a daily basis.
So you have a variety of courses on our platform, including one on TCP/IP, one on Hyper-V, Windows Server 2019, and PowerShell. Talk a little about PowerShell. You've got an introduction to PowerShell course. There are lots of people taking it. Tell us, for the sort of the average consumer, what is PowerShell, why is it important, and how does it fit into the Microsoft ecosystem?
For many years, command line has been the way that we have configured our servers and our workstations in not only on our local devices, but ways we can manage our devices remotely, whether they're in our office or around the world. The problem was everyone was creating commands sort of in their own little fiefdom. There was no real central way of doing this kind of thing. And so Microsoft came up with PowerShell and said, hey, here's a set of rules that you all have to adhere to. But the nice thing about that is it doesn't matter if 20 different people make these commandlets or scripts, PowerShell scripts. They'll all adhere to these rules, so we know that they're all going to work, which is great. It's going to work in every kind of situation. And whether Microsoft develops, whatever the commandlets are, or whether a third party, develops them, they're going to be able to be integrated. And so these rules are what you learn in your TCP/IP, in your PowerShell basics course. PowerShell is basically, in a nutshell, is a verb dash noun, get dash volume, show dash disk, all verb dash noun. That's PowerShell. And then after that comes all of these different switches and variables. And those are the things where you can create very complex commandlets and wrap those into PowerShell scripts that can change your life, really. I mean, they can automate things in ways that we never could do with command line alone.
And they're shareable and reusable.
Yeah, shareable. Yeah, absolutely.
So that you've created a script and you need to have someone running it or understanding how it works. Pretty easy for them to share it from. And is PowerShell mostly a cloud implementation or exclusively?
No, it's either one. I mean, it'll work on premises. It'll work on your Windows 10 computer. It'll work on your Windows Server. They've even created what's called a cross-platform PowerShell, so you can run PowerShell commands on Linux now. Blow your mind, right? You can run Windows commands on Linux, and they'll work.
Yeah. So I want to just wrap up with kind of the blue sky opportunity. You're saying to someone, hey kid, here's where you really need to go. This is in this, the ecosystem, the world of which you've described these various tools and technologies under the Microsoft ecosystem. Where would you say they need to head themselves? Where is the true north for you as an advisor, saying to someone, here's where you really need to go? You've gone through, as you said, you were in the film world. That changed. We all know these things will constantly change, and pivoting is part of life these days, pivoting always. But if someone's going to set out their boat, if you will, now, where is the true north that you would send them?
I would send them to on-premises learning first, because you're never going to understand the cloud unless you have your feet on the ground first. And then you'll understand what it is that you're doing. For people who are starting out in the cloud, I call them cloud-only illiterates, because they only understand little pieces of what they're seeing. They're not getting the building blocks that they need. So understand Active Directory, Windows Server 2019, although I understand a lot of people are still using 2016, that's fine. There's not that much difference between the two. Understand those technologies first. Understand how clients communicate with servers, and then understand how to secure that communication. And there's lots of different ways to do it. Of course, we have a big 2019 server course. And once you get those basics down, you will understand cloud, and cloud will come to you so much more naturally.
Yeah, and these are fields that are not going away. I mean, it's kind of remarkable how networks and servers are all the glue that holds this together, right? If you don't have them, you have, a little island. Kind of funny, years ago, I had a business, and one of our tagline was connecting, it was the mid-90s, connecting islands in a sea of information. Now, it happened to have been a healthcare-oriented business, so I had the dual problem of the idea that networks mattered, and secondly, that healthcare networks mattered. So, so at least fundamentally, we all agree that networks matter.
Yeah, that is true.
We all agree that the data that flows across them, across servers, et cetera, are pretty essential.
That is true.
Yeah. So I appreciate your time. We'll provide links to Robert's courses on our platform on this video afterwards, so people can see them and come to them. And obviously, come sign up. There are a lot of courses that stream free. You just sign up, you get what we call a Voyager account on our platform. If you want to upgrade to astronaut and get involved in, we have a commander. I mean, maybe we were thinking of a little too cutesy by half, but the idea is to get active in learning by doing. Okay, you don't learn in an environment. And Robert said the same thing that Tiago said the other day. Is you want to learn Azure? Set up an account. There's a lot of this software is available for download, free for trials. Try it. That's the best way to learn, and then learn from experts like Robert, who can give you insights that you will otherwise spend years banging your head against the wall trying to figure out. So with that, Robert, I really appreciate your time, and we'll see you next time on another Meet the Gurus, and definitely online.